Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching The Political Vigilante. A great way to support the show is to go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood, where you can submit articles like Lauren D'Alessandro has done. Lauren, thank you so much. You have been a regular supporter of the show for many years, and we very much appreciate it. And you also, the thing I love about this show, and especially at the Patreon level, is people send me stuff that I wasn't aware of, so then I can make more people aware of it here. And Lauren has sent us fantastic stuff in the several years that she's been a Patreon supporter. Much of it has been stuff about the economy, about the student debt bubble, about all different stuff like this. Well, this is something that I've been talking about, but it's a little alarming because this is in Bloomberg. Okay, this isn't some like lefty site. And I love all those lefty journalist sites, but when something like this hits the mainstream media, you know it's real. Workers keeping Americans fed are going hungry in the Heartland. Again, this is in Bloomberg. Hunger is surging in the heart of the breadbasket, showing just how dire the problem has become during the pandemic. There's 3 different people wrote this by Katerina Saravia, Carolina Gonzalez, and Peyton Forty. This just came out a couple weeks ago. This is, and they go into this whole thing about, they tell the story about being in Minnesota, and Jessica was surrounded by the food that she couldn't afford. They tell the story about this woman, Jessica Traxler. So she's working in these fields, getting this food, but she can't afford it. Sitting in a faded out Chevy sedan one July morning in southern Minnesota, she looked out at corn stalks, lush green as far as the eye could see. A few miles to the east, a mill was pumping out flour. Just beyond it, a farm grew peppers, beans, and berries. To the north, there were dairies, one after the other. To the south, a huge pork plant. Grain elevators, poultry yards, cheese plants, all stood a short drive away. She can't afford this. The ranks of Americans fighting hunger are projected to swell some 45% this year to more than 50 million people. I don't want to be right. I take no solace in when this all went down, everything got shut down. I said, there's going to be food riots. There's going to be eviction riots. We have 28 million evictions that are hanging over our head. And you couple that with this hunger. Trexler, her husband, and 6 children are among them. She had come to this spot, an empty school parking lot in town of Mankato, to collect free boxes of food staples, milk and apples and carrots. Hundreds of Minnesotans waited in line ahead of her for hours. It's been hard, she said. We've had to dramatically change how we eat. Richest country in the history of the world. So while this family of 8 now, who is working, is barely getting by, and they're hungry, and yet Wall Street got $4.25 trillion in the CARES Act. That $4.25 trillion was actually given to the American people. And this is why watching that debate was such a joke. Trump is just a dumbass crybaby, right? Who just complains and keeps interrupting and just says crazy stuff. And Joe Biden is useless too. And then they're all arguing at the same time. These 2 utterly corrupt parties that give Wall Street whatever they want, whenever they want it. Meanwhile, Americans, working Americans, are going hungry. Before the coronavirus shut down the U.S. economy and cost Traxler her job as a substitute teacher, she'd visited some community food shelves, but never been to the large-scale food bank in her life. Now at age 41, she's a regular. This is one of the most jarring aspects of the hunger crisis. About 1/3 of those relying on food shelves, large-scale and emergency food distributions, are now doing so for the first time, according to Feeding America, the nation's largest hunger relief organization. In parts of Minnesota, that number is closer to 70%. Let's look at this graph here. Okay. The US has the largest food insecure population for the world's high income countries and among the worst performers. Percentage of the population that cannot afford energy sufficient diet. United States, 1%. Slovakia, Italy, and then Lithuania below that. Croatia, Canada, our neighbors to the north, 0.2%. We're no longer projecting a surge. We are experiencing. So we're in it, folks. We're in it right now. That's what's happening. We're in this right now. It's not going to happen. It's happening. The evictions are already starting to happen. And our economy hasn't even completely bottomed out yet. And as we learned when we talked to Christy I on the show, and please watch that video, countries in the past, Greece and other countries that have just printed money, it never works in the long run. And we're not even printing money for good reasons. We're not even printing money for our own citizens. We're printing it for Wall Street. We're outspending the next 10 countries combined on war, but we have people here going hungry. During the pandemic, about 1/10 of American households reported they haven't had enough food in a given week. That's a shocking figure for the world's richest country. And let's not forget, billionaires have made record profits during this shutdown. So Americans are going to food banks for the first time in their life. The food banks are overwhelmed. 1/10 of the population says they're not getting enough food in the week because they just don't have the money. People are getting evicted. There's protests in the streets. And Jeff Bezos is set to be the world's first trillionaire. The ruling class is pushing us into a race war. They want this civil war to happen, and they want it to fall along race lines because they don't want working class white people and and all Americans of all ethnicities to get together and go, oh, we need to riot and protest against Bezos and the Walmart family and any of these big corporations and individual billionaires that are making record profits while people are going hungry. Jeff Bezos single-handedly could end this hunger problem in America like that and still be a billionaire. It's more than double pre-COVID figures and the highest since comparable government data starts in 1995. In contrast to the Dust Bowl years of the Great Depression, which is where, and I've said this before, when the stock market crashed in what was it, September of 29, it wasn't until about 1931, 32 that we really started to feel the effects of this. And everyone's like, open up the economy, open up the economy. They were arguing about that and the debate. Okay, let's say we open up the economy right now. Oh, yay. Who's got money? It's still not going to. This 6-month shutdown, and then we're going to have surges in COVID cases over the winter. In contrast to the Dust Bowl years of the Great Depression or the rationing of World War II, the crisis has nothing to do with food supplies. So let's clarify that. The Dust Bowl made just hundreds of thousands of square miles of farmland was not usable anymore. So we couldn't grow enough. That was part of the Dust Bowl, was that not only had the economy collapsed with the depression in the stock market, but the Dust Bowl, there wasn't enough food. This country couldn't grow enough food. That's not what's going on now. Everything that's happening now is created by the billionaire ruling class and these two utterly corrupt political parties that are their puppets. That debate yesterday was a puppet show. Oligarchs holding two puppets. The U.S. in a time of historic abundance There's no reason. There is no reason for anybody to be hungry right now. There is no reason for, there shouldn't be one. We have enough money for every single American to be in a home, an apartment of something. No one should be on the streets unless they're just so out of control with their drug use or something that they don't want to, like, which would be a handful of people, not the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people we have now. It was 500,000 homeless people in America before the pandemic. It's got to be at least 1 million now, if not more. We have the money for everybody to have a food, money, and a place to live. No one should be facing eviction. No one should be facing hunger. We have the money for this. The Democrats in Congress keep approving more increases for Trump's war budget. He said he was going to get us out of these 7 wars. He's still bombing 7 countries. He's got the biggest budget that anyone has ever gotten. And at that stupid debate, he's like, oh, Obama handed me a military that was in shambles. No, fuckstick. He handed you a military that was 7 times the spending of the next 7 countries combined. Now you have 10. It's so ridiculous. None of these Trump supporters who think Trump cares about them, you have been bamboozled beyond repair. And the people who think Biden and the Democratic Party is going to somehow come to the rescue, these 2 corrupt parties created this system to where the richest country in the history of the human race has people hungry and living in their cars. So that's the other point. The people that are living at home, they're falling behind on their rent, and they don't have that much money for food, they're very close to being on the street, which is not good for any society. The crime rates have gone up already during this. They're going to go up even more. In a time of historic abundance, with plentiful grains, meat, and dairy, so much that farmers have been plowing over excess crops and dumping milk. You saw those videos when the pandemic first happened. Well, now the state of California, Gavin Newsom, who has done some good things, this is one of them I'm about to list, but let's not forget, he gave 24 fracking permits on April 3rd in the middle. So he loves fracking, but he has tried to do this one thing I'll give him credit for. He has partnered very quickly with food banks and farmers, because California has a huge agricultural business, to get farmers to give them subsidies to pay this so that they're getting paid for these crops rather than plowing them over. We have such a horrible system that it's better financially for farmers to destroy crops because they can't sell. So we started getting those foods to schools, to food banks, and all this stuff. I even volunteered one day with the American Red Cross to distribute meals to people in LA. Something I would highly recommend. If you can donate money or time to a food bank, please do it. But you shouldn't have to donate money, because the richest country in the history of the world, there's plenty of food for everybody. But lockdowns have snarled supply chains, and food inflation is projected to rise at the fastest pace in almost a decade. Meanwhile, unemployment, low wages, and reduced working hours are diminishing purchasing power, all of which are disproportionately impacting women and minorities, as is food insecurity. Demand at Minnesota's food banks is up 65%. The $600 weekly supplement from the feds, which helped millions weather job losses and pay household bills, came to an end last month. Now we've got this $300, but it was $600. Now it's $300. Some states it's $400 if the state kicks in an extra $100. California's not one of those states. Cost of grocery spikes during the pandemic. See that? See how high that number goes up? That's all because of the pandemic. We have mortgage. We have all our utilities, she said. We really cut back even the fruits and vegetables. So people in this country with all these farmlands and all this, we don't have, they're not eating as much healthy food. So eating not food that's not great increases depression, like people don't have energy, productivity, emotions, fights, all this stuff is increased right now. Food is one of the last things on our list. In a pre-COVID world, it was among the most food secure states. Now, 1 in 8 people in the state of Minnesota is projected to struggle with hunger. Minnesota is home to beef giant Cargill, Cheerio maker General Mills, and Spam producer Hormel Foods. All 3 companies have been donating to food banks, and the Trump administration just dedicated an additional $1 billion to its program known as Farmers to Families Food Box Program, which is buying surplus supplies to deliver to food banks and other organizations. Which is they're doing that on a federal level. That's what governments should do. What Gavin Newsom did in California is not making him some hero. It's what governments should do. Even then, much of the food waste on farms hasn't been redirected because of limited logistics and infrastructure. Gee, I wonder if we stop spending all this money bombing poor people and spent it on our logistics and infrastructure. That's what FDR did with the New Deal. That's what a Green New Deal would do. You know, the Green New Deal that Trump said was too expensive and Biden said, I'm not for. We basically had a Republican debate. A Green New Deal would include helping farms and the agricultural business and making sure that there's money for logistics to get excess food so we're not wasting food. So our citizens, Americans, are not going hungry in a pandemic. This is the kind of stuff you read about some sort of banana republic, third world country. This is what happens in those countries, or in an empire that is collapsing. This is U.S. household hunger before and during the pandemic. The blue is prior. The yellow, right? So before the pandemic, if you look all households, it was 8.2%. Now it's 10.5%. So it's gone up to over 2%, but it still was pretty high. In the black families, black households, it was 18.3%. Now it's 20.6%. That's too high. Latino 12.7 pre-pandemic, now 17%. Again, too high. White 5.1 to 7%. Look at these pre-pandemic numbers are already too high. We would view this as the most significant challenge that the charitable food system has ever faced in the U.S., said Katie Fitzgerald, operating officer of Feeding America, which oversees a network of 200 food banks. Jeff Bezos, Walmart, the banks could all end this problem like that, by the way. They could all end this problem like that. They could end this. They could put people to work solving this problem. We're too busy bombing 7 countries and sanctioning a bunch more. The deepening hardship could explain why Trump is starting to lose support in rural counties. A lot of those rural counties are, red state. They voted for Trump and they're hungry. And where's their food? And he just goes, oh, it was the Democrats controlled. Okay. But if this is happening in Minnesota, I guarantee you it's happening in the Dakotas and Iowa and Nebraska and Texas and Mississippi and Arkansas, all of those places that are big, that's Trump country. All right. Going hungry? His job approval rate among rural residents has dropped over the summer to near the lowest this year, Gallup data shows. Trump spent time in August traveling to Minnesota, along with swing states like Wisconsin and Iowa, also super major food producers. In 2016, about 2.8 million or 13% of America's food workers were food insecure. Food workers. We're not talking about homeless people. That's already horrible. We're talking about people who have a job in the food industry, be it on a farm or at a packing plant or whatever. 13%. That's 2016 numbers. So they were food insecure and relying on the government's food stamps program. That's about 2.2 times higher than other industries. During the Great Recession, that figure surged to 4.6 million people, and the situation could turn more dire now because of prolonged wage stagnation. According to Jose Olivia, the campaign director of Heal Food Alliance, a workers' rights group, this one woman, Alicia Roja, has paid $12 an hour, and the last time her wage went up was about 2 years ago. When a coworker on the farm got infected with the coronavirus, operations shut down and she was out of work for 2 weeks in late June and wasn't paid. Her husband, who drives a truck for nearby farms, was unemployed for about a month during the pandemic. These are essential workers. Expenses piled up. While out of work, she started visiting a food bank where she got bread, meat, beans, rice, and some produce. Now that she's working again, she hasn't returned to the food bank because she says other people need it more. Wow. These people are trying to help out. We got work, so we don't need let somebody else get the food bank. Gee, what a noble idea. Everybody working together. It's hard to do that when you have two utterly greedy, corrupt, filthy parties that are bought and paid for by these soulless maggots called the billionaire ruling class. Their day, she doesn't eat anything more than an apple, or maybe a single tortilla with beans throughout her almost 10-hour physically demanding workday. When she returns home, she might have some eggs or potatoes. She sometimes feels helpless, being in abundance and not being able to have it. Jesus Christ. Sometimes it's more important to pay rent than to buy food. Don't you think these companies should be giving their employees some free food? Or instead of 12, this is why we need like $12 an hour, $15 on minimum wage. It's ridiculous. It should be $20 or $25, really. And I've shown this before, this statistic, that if minimum wage kept up with the profits of CEOs, was consistent with their profits, percentage-wise, minimum wage would be $24 an hour. Twice what this woman is making. That's what she should be making. She's an essential worker. She's busting her ass making sure Americans can get food and these big companies profit, and she has to eat an apple. I just suck it up. You don't think about food. It's not uncommon for women globally to eat less or even skip out on food in favor of feeding other family members. Women often eat last. They're eating least if food is scarce. Food inequities are also exacerbated along racial lines. In the U.S., Black Americans are 2.5 times as likely as their white counterparts to have low or very low access to enough food for an active and healthy life. For Latino Americans, the rate is double that of white people. In the Powderhorn neighborhood, where George Floyd was murdered by the police in May, 20% of Powderhorn's residents live below the poverty line in a state with the country's largest gap in median income between white and Black people. Some of the grocery stores and restaurants that shuttered during the demonstrations against police brutality and systemic racism have yet to reopen. That's leaving the area even further cut off from easy access to food, according to O'Toole. So, folks, this article goes. I'll put it in the show notes. But this is what somebody said. To see this in Minneapolis, this is unreal. This is the U.S. and we're dealing with this. We're all human and we have the same right to have food, to have nourishment. These are we can't even fulfill basic human rights of food. I don't folks, this is why we need more boycotts, more nonviolent resistance. This is what it's going to take. We got to just overtake capital and overtake Monsanto, and we need to protest some big corporations. This is why we need union wages. If this woman was in a union, they'd be taken care of. One thing they could say is we get a certain amount of free stuff from these companies we work for, or discounts or something. That's the thing I always liked about waiting when I waited tables is you get a free meal. Unbelievable, man. General strike, all stop. Yeah. And it's so preposterous to watch that debate. These are the two best candidates. These two utterly corrupt idiots, Trump and Biden. These two parasites with these political parties that don't give a damn about working class people at all. The Republicans are just a little better at hiding their contempt for regular people than the Democrats are. Both those two guys on stage are funded by big billionaires and big corporations. Both of those guys. Both of their parties are. They're utterly corrupt. And there's people hungry in America, people working in the food. So it's not, oh, this woman's lazy. No, she works a 10-hour shift. Ugh. So this is how empires collapse, man. And the ruling class is never skipping a meal. Let me tell you something. None of these billionaires have skipped a meal. None of these billionaires are worried about how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage on their 3 or 4 vacation homes. None of them. If you're a billionaire, you need to start liquidating a bunch of your assets and just helping people like this out. Because if you don't, these are the people that are going to rise up. Because when enough Americans are hungry and living on the street, they have no more options. That you see how the long-term strategy of this, right? That's why they need us fighting with each other on some kind of ridiculous civil war. We are in class war. Make no mistake. The fact that this woman gets $12 an hour, barely has any food to eat or feed her family, this is class warfare. The CEOs and the upper management at this company that she works for, they're doing fine. Monsanto executives are doing fine. Kraft Foods, they're doing fine. Hormel, they're doing fine. And then they get COVID at these factories and stuff. And then people like Chris Smalls try to organize a strike just to get hazard pay and not be put at risk. He's fired by Jeff Bezos. We are in class warfare. Make no mistake. Pick up a history book. This is what happens. The ruling class has everything, and we are barely getting by. Thanks for watching the show, folks. I'm going to talk about this in a way that the corporate media will never talk about this. So I don't have big corporate donors. There's not going to add, so please help the show. Go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood, rockfin.com/Graham Elwood. And if money's tight and you can't afford it, there's a bunch of great free ways to support the show. First of all, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like all of these videos, share them out on your social media, listen to the Political Vigilante podcast, which is on iTunes and other podcasting platforms, write a good review, share it. All of those are great free ways to support the show. When you watch the ads on YouTube, watch them all the way through. When you click skip ad, I don't get paid. I have a Pandora channel. Both my comedy albums are on it. It's free. I get residual income when you watch it. Those are all free ways to support the show. I understand money's tight for many of you. And so those are great free ways to support the show. And I very much appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Boom.